It is, I think it's like 6:30 right now exactly. Kind of feels like my mind has been a little bit busy, and when it gets to that point, I just need to refocus. Okay, so I'm gonna read and then I'm gonna write in my prayer journal. I haven't used it in so long. I've had this for years. Some of the stickers fell off, but I have two scriptures in mind to start with. I don't know. I guess I'll start with the one that comes first. So I'll start with Acts chapter 2. So I've read the book of Acts before and I really love it. And what's interesting is yesterday even I was reading Acts chapter 2 and so much jumped out at me for the first time. So I wanted to go into detail with it. So that's the first scripture I'm gonna focus on, and I guess afterwards I'll bring up the next one. I don't know why it's like I can't talk. Acts chapter 2. And when the day of Pentecost was fully come, they were all with one accord in one place. What is today? I just want to put a little kind of key to say like this color is for today, because the scripture already has a lot of annotations on it. Now for like the points that jumped out at me, right? Oh, are you kidding me? Okay, I used this highlighter color in chapter 3. No, actually, I don't. That's the yellow highlighter. It's different. Okay. Where's my pen? I'm always losing something. Okay. I have my pen. I have the highlighter. Okay. So the first thing that I highlighted, or the first thing that really jumped out to me, was really about these Jews. They say, behold, are not all these which speak Galileans? There's this saying that nothing good could come out of Galilee. And it was used in scripture earlier concerning Jesus. And I'm gonna pick this up. Hold on. You see, this is why it's good to study the word, because there's so many things that even if you read the word often, there's always something new. So that's why you need to stay consistent in the word, and also it keeps you. John 7 verse 52. They answered and said unto him, art thou also of Galilee? Search and look, for out of Galilee ariseth no prophet. It's out of Nazareth? Oh, it's out of Nazareth. But why? Historically, Nazareth was a small rural village with a population of perhaps 500 to 2,000 people located in the hill country of Galilee. I mean, it's in Galilee. Known for fishing and farming and for having lots of foreigners, which wasn't a good thing to some back in that day. But I want to know what the stereotypes were about Nazareth. Okay, but Judeans also tended to look down on Galileans, viewing them as uneducated and of questionable ancestry. And of course, in those days, ancestry was everything. Like, you can see genealogy in so many books. Also, like, the very ancestry of Jesus himself was significant. Okay. Many Bible commentaries give a picture of ancient Galilee as a rustic and so. Oh, by the way, I'm reading all of this from one source. It's tacticalchristianity.org. Okay, so it says many Bible commentaries give a picture of ancient Galilee as a rustic and socially backwards area looked down upon by Jews in Jerusalem and elsewhere. But modern archaeology has shown that although the Galileans may have had different accent and may not have had the education of many of the Jerusalem elites, they were nevertheless respected for their thriving commerce. All right, this is going to be something for me to study. But definitely the main concept, though, I guess, is that in them saying, are not all these Galileans, is they don't have education. So how would it be possible for them to be able to speak in the language of the elite? And that's the kind of thing God does. Like, God works wonders. Like, I heard of a testimony given by someone before that they were called to read the scripture in a church, right? But they didn't really have education in that way to be able to really read it and pronounce the words, you know, the way that you'd expect to hear it in a church service. And they literally prayed to God, and God like taught them, gave them the breakdown of the words and everything so that they could read the scripture perfectly. And you know, that's the kind of God we serve. Like, he's just concerned with everything about us, and he works miracles and wonders. So like, the woman of God goes to church, and actually people are expecting her to fail at the assignment, are expecting to get a good laugh out of it, but because God is her helper, she was able to do it well. And I'm like, wow. Anyway, back on track, because it's now 7:09. What time was it when I started this? It was like 6:30. Okay, not bad. Okay, right? So, behold, are not all these which speak Galileans, and how hear we men in our own tongue wherein we were born? So one day I'm gonna do like a little study of these places, maybe do some art. OMG! I would love to like have a good visual of how the, cause okay, hold on. Do I have a map in the back of this? If I don't have a map in the back of this, I'm gonna, OMG. This Bible doesn't have a map in the back of it. I'd have to get my other Bible, because I know for sure that the other one has a map. Okay. But I would like to have a visual of how these places looked. I think it would be really cool to just have little, because you know it's really cool. Some people, especially like digital artists. Yeah, I didn't mean to say visual. I meant digital artists. There's a certain artist that makes these imaginary lands and makes it with so much detail and so beautiful. But imagine taking like these historic places that are described in the Bible and creating something out of that. Like, I feel like that would be so nice. Verse 13 jumped out at me. Others mocked and said, these men are full of new wine. Now, anytime someone preaches off of this scripture, right, they're going to somehow make reference to that specific verse, right? Or like verse 14 when Peter stands up and he responds to it and such. But for some reason, it just stood out to me so much that scripture said that they were mocking. I don't know. I think it just never jumped out to me to this point. There are times when you're doing the work of the Lord and there are going to be mockers no matter what. Like, there's always going to be someone that is talking. Why? Because you're doing the work of the Lord. And at the end of the day, the adversary is on assignment and he's going to use whatever vessel he can use, because you are God's vessel. God is able to use you. So the enemy needs to he needs to do what he has to do, right? It's his job. But at the end of the day, the mockers, there's a scripture Apostle Paul is writing, and he says, he's talking about, there's some people who kind of wanted to go against his ministry. But Apostle Paul is like, nonetheless, as long as the gospel is being preached and taught, it's all good. Like, I'm okay. You see, I love Apostle Paul. I love the way that he writes. I'm gonna need to find that scripture though. I'm gonna need to find it because I know what I'm talking about. Hold on. Philippians 1 verse 15. Some indeed preach Christ even of envy and strife, and some also of goodwill. 16. The one preach Christ of contention, not sincerely supposing to add affliction to my bonds, but the other of love, knowing that I am set for the defense of the gospel. Verse 18 is what I was talking about. What then? Notwithstanding every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is preached, and I therein do rejoice, yea, and will rejoice. You see, this is why I love him. He's saying he doesn't care. He does not care. And imagine, I want to be like that. I want to be at a place where like nothing else matters but the work of God and what he tells me to do. It's not a nonchalance. God gives you a certain spirit to be able to have patience, to be able to love in spite of, to be able to do the work and persevere in spite of. So I love that. And like it just jumped out to me because I was like, wow. First of all, the news spread really quickly, right? Because there was suddenly, the move of God was sudden. And then right after though, in verse 6, it says, now when this was noised abroad, so it just spread so quickly. But at the end of the day, people are going to need to talk. People need to talk. The word needs to be spread. Yeah, it just has to happen. So there are going to be mockers. But at the end of the day, God is just God himself. And he doesn't need help. He will work in his own way. And verse 14, he was able to work through Peter, for example, and give him holy boldness to stand up. And what I liked is that it said, but Peter standing up with the 11. So once again, Acts 1 and 2, anytime you want to look into unity, anytime I want to look into unity, I know that I can look to Acts chapter 1 and 2, because there's this togetherness that is described. And it even goes back into the unity later at the very end of the scripture too, because it talks about how they continued steadfastly. So I highlighted verse 18. I don't know, just where it says, and on my servants and on my handmaidens I'll pour out in those days of my spirit. I just highlighted it. I don't know, just something about being a servant or a handmaiden of God jumps out to me. Verse 25. I paused a little bit to talk about it because there is this psalm that I really, really love that I think it's referring to Psalm 16. Hold on, let me write down the scriptural reference or allusion. Come on, pen. I really don't like when pens decide not to work the moment that I decide to write out my Bible, because why are you trying to mess up the word? So Psalm 16, verse 8. I have set the Lord always before me, because he is at my right hand, I shall not be moved. Therefore my heart is glad, and my glory rejoiceth. My flesh also shall rest in hope. For thou wilt not leave my soul in hell, neither wilt thou suffer thine Holy One to see corruption. Verse 11. Thou wilt show me the path of life, in thy presence is fullness of joy. At thy right hand there are pleasures forevermore. Scripture is so beautiful, isn't it? All right, in verse 29, in the end of the verse, first of all, when I was reading this yesterday, I loved it because I was like, Peter had a teaching moment and he was breaking it all down so that we understand. What I love about the ministry that I'm a part of, right? When someone is called with the fivefold ministry gifts, you should see them work. And I can see that in my leader. And there would be times of preaching, but then there are also times of teaching where, you know, the church needs to be taught something specifically. And my leader would really like break it down for you and make sure that it's clear. Because, I mean, preaching and teaching each have their functions of edification. Sometimes the people really need to be taught something specifically. Sometimes something specific needs to be brought to light. And I don't know, Peter had a teaching moment here. And at the end of verse 29, he's saying, right, he speaks of the patriarch David, that he is both dead and buried, and his sepulcher is with us unto this day. So I did mention that I love verse 37, how it says, now when they heard this, they were pricked in their hearts. I laughed, right? Because, you know, they said unto Peter and to the rest of the apostles, men and brethren, what shall we do? It made me think of a song. That's why I laughed. I'm always thinking of songs when I'm reading scripture. And it makes sense because, you know, scripture is for everything. It's for inspiration. So when these songwriters and these gospel songwriters put together the songs that we sing all the time in church, I mean, it's with divine inspiration from scripture and from God himself. And what's funny is also that even in secular music, scripture has influence. So, I don't know. The last point, I was referring to unity a little bit earlier. Well, the scripture starts with unity and it also ends with unity because, you know, it talks about the 3,000 souls that were added, and it says that they continue steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and fellowship. So they were bearing each other up. They were taking heed to each word and being completely obedient, and they were being steadfast in it. They continued in the traditions, the breaking of bread, prayers, and verse 34, all of them that believed had all things common. And it's a shame when in the house of the Lord we're unable to help each other, because we should be able to. I'm jumping over to Ephesians 4, and that will be where I stop. Oh, it's getting chilly.